Hello, everyone, and thank you for taking the time to be with us today. I'm Joe Rosengarten, an editor with HRD Magazine, and I'm excited to be introducing this webinar on Working Smarter with our host, Graham Lowe. Thanks so much for registering and being with us today. A couple of quick pieces of housekeeping from me, and then I'll hand you over to Graham. Firstly, the slides from Graham's presentation will be available for attendees. Secondly, I'll take the opportunity to let you know that there will be a Q&A session towards the end of the discussion, where Graham will answer your questions. So be sure to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your page. Well, I think that's enough from me now. Graham, hello, and thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks very much, Joe. I'd like to welcome all of you to today's webinar on Working Smarter. I'm a workplace consultant and author, and today I'm going to draw on insights from my latest book, Redesigning Work, which I co-authored with Frank Graves, who's the president of Ecos Research Associates. The basic question I want to address is, how can you design work to improve both well-being and performance? This question raises all sorts of big talent management issues that we're going to get into. So I'm pleased that the sponsor of today's webinar is Cornerstone On Demand, a talent management company whose mission is to help the world's leading organizations realize the potential of their people. Before I get into my presentation, I just want to reiterate Joe's point that we would like to make this webinar as interactive as possible. So please use the Q&A function throughout my presentation to send comments or to raise any questions. So what I'm going to do is cover four big areas. I'm going to start by talking about some of the mega trends that have really been reshaping the world of work over the last decade or more. Then I'm going to talk about something that I call the capability gap, which essentially is the gap between the human capital that's available in the Canadian workforce and the utilization of that resource. Then I'm going to connect all of this to well-being, which I know is a huge issue for many organizations, looking at how they can address employee well-being, basically health and well-being issues. And to move it into a very practical discussion, what I'm then going to do is identify ways that you can actually design jobs to be smarter in ways that will not only close the capability gap, but at the same time contribute to employee well-being and improved organizational performance. So to look over the last decade, I think we would all agree that it's been pretty much a roller coaster. Think back exactly 10 years. We were basically at the beginning of what was going to be a huge financial crisis globally and a recession. Many Canadians during this period perceived declining opportunity. In fact, the polls that I discussed with Frank in Redesigning Work suggest that many Canadians expect the next generation to have a lower living standard than they currently have. But at the same time, in the labor market, there was a premium for knowledge workers. So those, especially with graduate and professional degrees, were doing better, while the rest of the workforce was basically trying to hold their own, and in many cases doing worse. On top of that is a trend that we're all very familiar with and we've known about for a long time, and that's an aging workforce, which means that many very experienced workers are about to exit, which raises, again, all kinds of talent management issues. Then there's the digital revolution, which is transforming on a daily basis the way we work and will continue to do so at an accelerated pace into the future. And finally, for many organizations in some industries and certainly some regions of the country, there's a skills crunch, which means that they're having difficulty finding the right people to meet their current and future requirements. So this basically is the backdrop for looking at some critical talent management issues. But just under that surface of those big trends, there are other trends that I think need to be brought front and center. What we've seen over the last decade is a change in the quality of work and the quality of people's work lives. We've seen stress go up, work-life balance go down, job satisfaction go down, and increasingly people are saying that they are less engaged and less motivated in their work. Now here's again, to look at the bigger trends here, here's, I think, one of the key pieces that we need to pay attention to in terms of data points. If you look at this graph, which, by the way, comes from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, basically it's the world's largest economic think tank, and they've looked here at over 30 countries, and they have put Canada at the top of the list in terms of the percentage of the workforce that has a post-secondary education. You could almost say that Canada is an outlier on this, which really is a good thing. But what it does is it sets a very high bar for employers in terms of talent management, because what it's saying is we have an abundance of human capital in our workforce, and that begs the question, how well are we actually using it? So to pursue this question and to look at how well we're actually using the capabilities or the human capital that's available, in Redesigning Work, we focus on three measures that are, we think, really central to the whole discussion around talent management. First question, are you able to take initiative in your job? Second question, do you fully contribute your knowledge, skills, and abilities? Third question, are you able to learn new ways to do your job better? And you can see that on all of these key indicators, over the last decade, the percentage of workers saying that, yes, they're able to do this frequently or always has gone down, which is a clear signal that the capability gap, in fact, is growing. Now, this is important because the extent to which people are able to use their human capital in their jobs, take initiative, fully contribute, learn new ways of doing their job, has a direct bearing on how engaged they are in their work. Now, in Redesigning Work, we actually looked at the precursor to engagement, which is whether or not when people wake up in the morning, they actually look forward to going to their job. In other words, whether or not they're motivated. You need to be motivated in the first place in order to go into a workplace and feel engaged. So you can see here, there's a direct relationship between those who really look forward to work, who basically say that basically when they wake up, they jump out of bed, they can't wait to get into work or to go to their shift. Those are people who are far more likely to be taking initiative and contributing and learning. So that's the relationship here. Now, it's a two-way relationship, which is important to recognize. So really, you can think of this as a positive upward spiral. The more that people are able to take initiative and contribute and learn, the more they're going to feel motivated and engaged in their work. And similarly, the more that they feel engaged and motivated, the more that they're going to contribute. I mean, basically, that's the positive upward spiral. What we want to avoid, of course, is the reverse, which is a downward negative spiral. Now, one of the interesting insights, I think, in the whole analysis we provide of capabilities in Redesigning Work is how different groups in the labor market vary in their use of their human capital or their capabilities. And what's very interesting here is that the self-employed are far more likely than full-time, part-time, or temporary and contract employees to say that they take initiative and contribute and learn. And this has really echoed for me because in many workshops that I've conducted with managers, the discussion around engagement often drifts into a very interesting analysis of how jobs could be redesigned so the employees actually feel more ownership over their work. And essentially that means making them as if they're self-employed, because self-employed people do have that sense of ownership much more directly. I want to focus as well your attention on the bottom set of bars here, the temporary contract and casual workers, because this is a huge pool of untapped potential, and you can see that they are considerably less likely to be really utilizing their capability. And we've analyzed this further, and there are many well-educated workers here who come into large organizations on contracts, and they don't feel like they're part of the team. They don't feel like they're really connected to the organization. That's a problem. And that's something that I think when you're looking inclusively at talent management issues need to be considered. Now, many of the trends that we're looking at today are not all consistent. In other words, there's some cross-cutting trends, and this is one that to me might raise a paradox, because on one hand, I showed you in that OECD slide that Canada's an outlier. We have so many well-educated workers, yet what this slide shows is at the very same time, over the last 20, 25 years, Canadians have actually felt less confident that they have the skills and knowledge necessary to move around in today's labor market, which means to go out and get another job, a better job, or even an equivalent job. What explains this? Well, there's a number of possible explanations, and I want to throw one out for your consideration. I'd be interested in your responses to this. We know from a lot of research that's been done on literacy that it's use it or lose it. In other words, if people have high levels of literacy going into a job and they're not using those reading, writing, and mathematical skills, they are likely to lose those capabilities over a period of time. This could be what's going on here, which is a very troubling possibility from a talent management perspective. So think about that in terms of your own workforce. If people are not using what you may have hired them for, or hired them because of their credentials, then there's a chance that it could atrophy. That creates serious problems. There's more to look at in terms of people's capabilities. We in Redesigning Work also asked representative samples of Canadian workers if they'd be interested in taking on more responsibility. For example, management responsibility, or if they're already a manager, if they'd like more management responsibility. Over half overall said they would, but look at the percentage of people under the age of 45 who are ready, willing, and able to take on more responsibility. Similarly, look at those who are planning to switch careers. Now, there's a whole other discussion we could have about why is it that people want to switch careers, and it's not surprising that younger people are more likely to say they want to switch, but focus your attention on the fact that more than 1 in 10 older workers, 55 plus workers, are thinking about switching careers. This suggests that they perceive they've got more to offer. They're not really thinking about planning retirement. They're thinking about getting a better, more meaningful job where they can contribute more. So that again suggests untapped human potential. Now let's link all of this to well-being, because if we look at the conditions in a job and in a work environment that encourage people to contribute, to learn, to further develop their skills and abilities, we know that these are the kinds of experiences that also contribute to their well-being. And there's a pretty good quote here, I think, from the World Economic Forum. I'm sure most of you have heard of this. It's a big conflab in Switzerland where billionaires and big thinkers get together, and a lot of economists. And they put out economic reports. So there is a very strong economic focus on what they do. And they basically are making a connection between the well-being of workers and the productivity and prosperity of nations on an economic front. So this is a very important connection. There's tons of research that backs this up. If we look at how overall well-being is measured, most of the researchers in this field are using a self-assessed well-being, where you've got a 10-point scale from, or an 11-point scale from 0 to 10, asking people overall, how would you rate your life? How satisfied are you, in other words, with your life? So what I've done here is show that there's a strong relationship between people's sense of overall well-being measured on that 10-point scale of life satisfaction, and their work experiences. In other words, looking forward to work, being satisfied with their job, having work-life balance, and experiencing low job stress. So these are the kinds of conditions on a daily basis in people's jobs that do more than make them just feel engaged. It actually contributes much more broadly to their overall sense of well-being, or to use the colloquial term, happiness. And you can see by looking at the bottom set of bars here that people who are reporting low life satisfaction, they don't look forward to their jobs, they're not satisfied with their jobs, and so on. So that's the kind of connection that we're looking at. So anything you can do as HR professionals or talent management professionals to improve those conditions contributing to people utilizing their capabilities will in turn be reflected in the workplace indicators we've got at the top of this chart, but as well, more broadly, employees' overall well-being. This is what we want to avoid. Dilbert is one of my favorite commentators on today's workplaces. And this is a very poignant question where Asok is asking Dilbert, I feel unfulfilled in my job. When does that go away? Well, the fact is, for many workers, it doesn't. And the consequences of that simple fact could be devastating for not only the individual, but the organization. So that takes us into a discussion of, so how do we design jobs so that we can avoid that Dilbert-esque scenario? Thinking ahead 10 years, because this is a medium and longer term project. This isn't something that you're just going to turn around and do in the next quarter, certainly in the next year. So thinking medium and long term, what can be done? Well, to guide that discussion, consider this model, which is a pretty simple model that describes what actually drives organizational performance. We need to look at people's day-to-day work experiences, which in the Dilbert cartoon was being very clearly expressed in negative terms. We need to look at people's work motivation, which I mentioned earlier is really the precursor to feeling engaged in your job. And we also need to look at people's work values. What is it that they really believe is important for them to get in a job? When you put all of that together, you have a recipe that can contribute to their overall quality of work life. That's what QWL is, and their well-being, because those two are they're organically connected. That sets the stage for people to actually use the capabilities they brought into the workplace and to further develop those capabilities. That's what drives performance. So that's a pretty simple model, and there's lots of evidence and discussion of this in Redesigning Work. But let me kind of give you some highlights here of how all of this fits together. One of the questions that we asked in surveys of Canadian workers is, what's the most important characteristic for you if you were going out today looking for a new job? What would be really the key criteria in choosing another job? And you can see from this list, which actually is rank ordered, people want respectful and inclusive workplaces. This is a huge value for Canadians. They also want work that gives them a sense of pride and accomplishment. Job security, which is more on the economic side of the job, is important, but clearly not number one. And these questions, by the way, were asked pre and post recession, and they didn't change much at all. These values are pretty stable. Also important is having challenging and interesting work. And finally, a healthy and a safe workplace. These are basics, but they are very important. And the fact that they're important for people means that if people don't have these in their job, then that could reduce their sense of satisfaction, engagement, and motivation. We asked another question. This is a question that was open-ended. So people actually wrote in their responses, and we did a content analysis of thousands of comments. Fascinating. The book actually gives you the verbatim quotes from some of the people, just to get the flavor of what is it that really makes people look forward to work. You know, that when they wake up in the morning, they jump out of bed and they can't wait to get into the workplace. What is it? Well, the first and foremost, it's the people they work with. And, you know, people saying, oh, I've got great coworkers, a fantastic team, we all pull together. Those kinds of comments are really captured in that. Second, having challenging, interesting, and varied work. And that's work that is going to really tap into their capabilities. And then being able to help people, customers, clients, and society, particularly customers and clients. This really resonates for people in terms of giving them meaning and purpose. So thinking back to the Dilbert cartoon, one of the things that could really answer that question is, well, if you were able to feel you're helping customers and clients in your job and you felt that connection, you would be far more satisfied because there's more purpose and meaning. Now, if you look at the right side of this graph, what you'll see is the kinds of things that when people are asked, you know, what single change would make you look forward to work even more, this is where the economics of the job come in. And for those of you who have taken, you know, Psychology 101, you might recall discussions of Hertzberg's two-factor theory of job satisfaction, that the things on the left are really what contribute to people feeling satisfied, whereas the things on the right, while at decent levels are essential requirement, really are more likely to contribute to dissatisfaction in people's jobs. So I want to focus on the left because this is where you really can make a big difference in terms of people feeling motivated, engaged, satisfied, and therefore have positive well-being through their work. So the book pulls together a lot of data looking at values, work experiences, what people really want in a job, what they already have in their job, the gaps between that. And what we come up with is essentially a vision that has been articulated by Canadians through these surveys that we've done of what constitutes a great job. And there's really 4 dimensions. The first is relationships, as I've mentioned. The co-workers, relationship with management, relationship with customers and clients. The second dimension is the tasks that people perform. That when tasks are challenging, interesting, and meaningful, those are the really defining characteristics that contribute to the job being great. The work environment, which is the bottom left, is very important. That's where we find a healthy, safe, or a respectful and inclusive environment. That's where we find flexibility, and that's where people, you know, really feel supported in terms of the kind of work environment that they're in. And then finally, the economics of the job. And the economics really get at the basic features like pay, benefits, and security. And as I mentioned, you know, those are the kinds of things that are going to more likely detract from rather than really contribute to people feeling engaged, satisfied, and experiencing a sense of well-being as a result of their work. So that's the vision, and that vision can guide a lot of job redesign. But you first of all need to know how your workforce, your employees, are experiencing these 4 dimensions of work. Something else I want to point out is that when you look at the importance of relationships, tasks, and the work environment for people, we're really looking at a psychologically healthy and safe workplace. And what I've noticed over the last 5-7 years is growing interest among Canadian employers in psychological health and safety in the workplace and finding ways to address and improve this, often guided by the national standard for psychological health and safety in the workplace, which is voluntary and free, and there's a lot of resources. So I'm just pointing out here that there are a lot of parallels between the standard, what now people are calling a psychologically healthy and safe workplace, and what Canadians, coming at it from a much wider perspective, have told us constitutes a great job. So now if we look at what's missing, because again, as I said earlier, not all of this picture is entirely, it's not like a nice, neat puzzle where all of the pieces just neatly fit together. There are some cross-cutting trends and some contradictory findings here. And some of the things that we know from a lot of academic research are important for people to really contribute in a job and to have high job performance are missing in terms of the vision. And the vision is crafted based on what Canadians say they want. People put less emphasis than we might expect or might even hope on things like having decision input, having autonomy in their work, and training. Now, there's discussion in the book about the possible explanations for this. I'm not going to go into it now, but what's important is that these factors we know from a lot of research do contribute to people's use of their capabilities and further development of their capabilities. We know that, for example, having job autonomy and input definitely contributes to reducing stress. We know that training is essential if people are going to continue to, if you want to have a learning environment in your organization. So employers need to recognize that that these factors contribute to business success, performance, and well-being, but that they can also be barriers to change, to redesigning work. So you need to address them head on. And you need to help employees understand the importance of these factors because they really can stand in the way. Now, something else that can be, I think, a significant barrier to change in the workplace, especially around job redesign, is the level of trust between frontline employees and management, middle and senior management. And what we can see here is that there has been a fairly steady decline in trust. Now, the question in the survey that's being reported in this graph is, to what extent do you trust senior managers in your organization to take employees' interests into account when planning changes? It's a pretty basic measure of trust. And we can see that we're now down to a fairly low, it was relatively low back before the recession, but all of the changes that I outlined earlier over the last decade have continued to erode trust. So now, the latest survey we've done shows that 44% are saying that they basically have no trust. So looking at the level of trust in your work environment is also an important starting point for even thinking about planning how to make work more rewarding for people and designed in ways that will draw out more of their capabilities. I'm sure many of you have experienced this lack of trust in trying to plan and implement change, and I'd encourage you to use the Q&A button to provide your observations and comments about this, because in my discussions with organizations across the country, running workshops in person, I hear this virtually all the time. Low trust, or conversely, but unfortunately in fewer cases, high trust is what's essential in order to really bring about meaningful change that contributes both to well-being and performance. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is give you a little bit of humor on the trust issue, because if we go back to my initial couple of slides looking at capabilities and saying Canadians are the best educated, we've got the best educated workforce in the world, yet people are saying they can't fully contribute, they're not learning on their job, they don't feel that their skills and abilities are really being utilized. One of the preconditions for utilizing that human capital is trusting your employees. If you are expecting people to go out and really apply their knowledge to a problem, you have to trust them to do that, and you can't keep them on a short leash. Or in this case, I mean, this is a somewhat bizarre example, but I think it's kind of emblematic of the trust issue, whereby a lot of managers don't really trust their employees. And if you look at, I mean, there's different areas of research that speaks directly to this. So why is it that flexible work arrangements are not widespread, knowing that people really would like these? Why is it that telework, in other words, being able to work from home, is not as common as the technology would permit? Well, one of the reasons is because managers don't trust employees. They need the FaceTime in order to confirm to them that these people are actually working. So this is an issue, I think, in terms of talent management. I don't know. I'd be interested to know how central this has been to your discussion about talent management initiatives and whether you've actually addressed it. Okay, so to wrap things up, I want to give some fairly high level, but hopefully practical suggestions for working smarter. And I think you can see this theme of working smarter running through the entire presentation here. It's really saying, look, we have such an abundance of talent in this country. We need to find better ways to utilize it, because by doing so, we're not just going to have better performing organizations. We are going to be contributing to employees' overall work engagement, satisfaction, and well-being. So linking strategically employee engagement, which I know is front and center for virtually all medium and large-size employers in this country, linking that and your kind of engagement strategy, which really is kind of at the center of HR initiatives, with well-being and capabilities is critical. So when you think about an engagement strategy, that strategy could be expanded to incorporate health, safety, and wellness, and talent management. It all needs to be interconnected, and you need to understand within the context of your organization. Because remember, we're all unique in terms of the the contextual factors in our organization. So you need to understand how those pieces will fit together within your particular context. The second thing that I would suggest is to look at what I've called the capabilities gaps. And I know that many of you, if not most of you, are conducting pretty regular employee surveys. I also know that some of the surveys do have questions on whether people are using their skills in their job, whether they're able to be innovative in their job. So I would say the first place to go is go back to your employee survey and look at what indicators you've already got and data you've already got that can tell you whether there is a gap. And look at the percent positive on those survey indicators about people feeling they're using their skills, they're learning, they're taking initiative. Also look at, again, surveys often have questions about training and the adequacy of training they're receiving. Look at those. If you don't have those kinds of measures in your survey, many survey providers will, for a small additional cost, enable you to put on optional questions. There's lots of questions that are in the public domain in Redesigning Work. You can take them, use them, that's great. You'll also have benchmarks if you use them. So what I'm suggesting here is that you can actually document within your own workforce what those gaps are. Because you will know by department, by operating division, by however you break down your survey results, you'll know the demographics of that workforce. And if you've got a lot of well-educated workers in one area who are saying, you know what, I don't feel like I'm actually able to learn and develop in my job, then you've got a gap. That's something that you can jump on. The third suggestion is to find ways to redesign jobs that better use and develop people's capabilities. So this is pretty high level stuff, but let me give you a practical example that comes from the front lines of organizations. So the work I've done in healthcare, so this would be in hospitals across the country, that are large, very complex organizations. What's been really impressive to me is how frontline nurses in particular get involved as teams. So, you know, a particular team in one part of the hospital gets involved in a quality improvement initiative, the goal being to improve the efficiency and the quality of care they deliver to patients in whatever type of healthcare they are providing. And basically, these quality improvement initiatives work best when the teams are empowered to identify the problem, find a solution, work with technical experts if they need to come up with an elegant solution, implement the solution, and one of the big outcomes is not only improved quality of care, but as measured through engagement surveys, the engagement levels for people involved in this type of process goes way up. So that's in a sense, that's a job redesign, because what you're doing is you're expanding the scope of these frontline workers' jobs to include real quality improvement initiatives, designing, implementing, monitoring, and continuing to improve. So that's one example from one industry. There are many other examples, I'm sure. And again, use the Q&A function. We'd love to hear from you on this. The example I've just given really speaks to point number 4 as well, which is enabling people to participate and collaborate in change. So again, I'll give you an example. One organization I worked with was moving to a brand new physical facility, big organization. And this can be, as you all know, at a personal level, moves are stressful and chaotic. They can be. So what the organization did was to say, okay, the move is basically a big change management challenge. How do we design that so that everybody in the organization can actually participate in the process, feel like they have some input, and in each area, the details of the move can be worked out collaboratively and coordinated, of course. That's a given. And you know what? The move went very well. So that's one example. And what I'm doing here is trying to identify ongoing challenges that organizations face and suggesting how you can come at those challenges from a different perspective, basically the perspective of, okay, so how do we work smarter here? And that will open up new and I hope better opportunities. The 5th point that I want to make has to do with identifying within your organization change barriers. Now, I mentioned trust. You may have relatively high levels of trust. That's great. That means that your ability within the organization to actually design and implement changes around talent management will be smoother than organizations with low trust. But if trust is low, that's a barrier you need to address. Training. Now, as I mentioned earlier, on average in this country, in the Canadian workforce, people are skeptical about the value of training. So you may need to address up front the rationale for you providing additional training. Or if you're using terminology like a learning organization, I mean, I've seen employees whose eyes absolutely glaze over when they hear that terminology. Why? Because there's no substance to it. There's nothing really behind it. So again, if you're thinking, well, you know, let's kind of reframe our talent management around creating a learning organization. I'm just using this as an example, but you need to be doing that in steps that can demonstrate tangibly at each, point along the way that there can be and will be meaningful change that results, that will benefit employees in terms of their learning. So that means identifying and removing the change barriers. Otherwise, you're just going to be running up against the wall. And finally, as you can see from pretty much everything I've presented here, I tend to come from a place of a lot of evidence. And I like to look at the evidence, whether it's collecting new data through the kind of work for surveys that Frank Graves and I have done through ECOS, or whether it's using your own employee survey data or your HRIS data to track capability issues. All of this is extremely important. So I would say look at what's available to you now in your various sources of data. Try to connect the big dots in terms of what's really critical for better use and development of people's capabilities. And if there are gaps in measurement, there are simple ways. I've suggested a few, but there are other ways where you can actually fill those gaps. So this is important, and it's important to, you can see that this bottom line has basically four big concepts: well-being, capabilities, job quality, and performance. And I hope I've convinced you that they're all interrelated like that. So what I'm suggesting here is not only to be grabbing onto available data or filling gaps that you might have in these areas, but also being able to connect these four big concepts, these four big dots, because by doing that, you will be creating an organization that is not only higher performing, but also is better utilizing the talent that you're employing and contributing to the overall well-being of your employees. All big goals. So I'm going to end here. I want to thank you for your attention. We intentionally have time for Q&A, and Joe's going to field the questions. And if there's comments that have come in, Joe is going to read them. I really appreciate your attention, and I am very much looking forward to your questions and comments. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Graham, for I think what everyone will agree was a fantastic presentation. We have had some questions in, quite a few, so we'll tackle as many as we can.
Great.
So to kick us off, there's been lots of interest in the national standard of Canada for psychological health and safety in the workplace. How do your suggestions for working smarter contribute to creating a psychologically healthy and safe workplace?
Well, thanks, Joe. And I'd be interested to know how many of our participants today are familiar with the standard. Basically, if you Google it, it'll take you to the Mental Health Commission or another site where you can download all of the free resources. But the standard identifies 13 workplace factors that are critical for a positive psychological environment at work. And among these are the sorts of job features that I've documented Canadians really value. So people want a respectful work environment. They want an inclusive work environment. But also on the list are factors that are dead center as far as talent management, growth and development, for example, recognition and rewards, having involvement and influence. These are opportunities to grow and develop. I mean, when you think about psychological health, these are the factors that a lot of research document contribute to psychological health. So I see a lot of overlap, actually. And I'm not suggesting here that, the folks in the talent management area kind of run out and all, jump all over the national standard. But I'm just making the point here that there is, this really amplifies for me the connection between effective talent management and employee well-being as defined by psychological health and safety.
Various surveys by Gallup and other organizations document a decline in workforce engagement. How will closing the capability gap help to reverse this trend?
Well, so that's a very good question, and yes, indeed, Gallup and other global organizations have been running surveys. I mean, the Conference Board in America has a kind of a running trend survey on satisfaction and engagement, and certainly comparing pre and post recession. So over the last 10 years, there definitely has been a trend toward declining engagement. And I hope that the evidence that I presented shows that engaged employees are those employees who are more likely than their disengaged peers to feel that they can contribute, learn, and develop their skills and abilities further in their job. And those are kind of three or four cornerstones, if you like, of a strong talent management system. So there's a very, very clear connection here. And the book goes into much more detail on this. And I think the good news is that Canadian employers have an excellent starting point for doing this because of the fact we have such a highly educated workforce. There's many countries where we can't assume that people coming in have the basic level of education that they're going to need. There might need to be much more remedial development done. We don't have that situation here.
We have a question specific to bullet point 5 on slide 22 now,
Sure.
which was to do with identifying and removing change barriers.
Right.
So the question is, what do you do when that barrier is coming from senior management, say someone who's a president or an SVP?
Right. Find a workaround. And I've seen this happen in many organizations where the people who are mid-level HR or talent management folks or occupational health and safety folks realize that even within the scope of their work plan, there are things that they can do that will really push the envelope in terms of achieving talent management goals. And figure out as a talent management professional, especially if you're in a big organization, be really clear on the sphere of influence that you have and push to the limits of that sphere of influence. And frankly, in organizations, things change and leadership at the top changes. And I've seen, again, from my consulting experience, organizations where there's lots of big plans, only parts of those plans can be developed, and then the CEO leaves, somebody else comes in, and bang, they're ready to run with something far more robust. So I know that may be not a fully satisfying answer, but frankly, based on what I've seen, I think that's the most practical we can be.
And we had a similar question to the previous question.
Right.
It's to do with senior management. And we had someone asking your thoughts on how to get senior management to buy in to this sort of change.
Right. Okay. So again, this is based on my own experience as a consultant. When a senior management team is skeptical of doing more around whether it's engagement, talent management, health and well-being, or even health and safety, they're not going to be very convinced if you bring piles of external evidence. So letting them know what the latest research has to say may not be all that convincing. However, if you can take to that team their own data, in other words, show what things look like within your organization, that is far more convincing. So if you have access to a full suite of human resource HR data and fairly decent employee survey data, and I gave some suggestions earlier about how you can actually complement existing survey just by adding a couple of questions around talent management. You can paint a picture of your own organization that shows the impact of low engagement on health benefits utilization, on turnover, on absenteeism, on and on. You can paint that picture using your own data, and I think that's more convincing and you can actually put costs to it as well because it's your data, your organization. That's far more convincing for the skeptics.
You had one slide that broke down career aspirations by age group. More broadly, what can you tell us about generational differences in work experiences and work values?
Thanks for the question. There's actually a whole chapter in Redesigning Work looking at generational differences. And what we find is that those differences in popular media and in day-to-day discussions tend to be overblown. We actually find a surprising level of convergence around some of the things that younger workers and older workers, so by younger 35 and under, by older 55 and plus, want. For example, workplace flexibility. This isn't just something that the millennials want. Workers 55 plus are equally interested in having access to more flexible work arrangements. So at a practical level, my suggestion here is to understand the demographics of your workforce and understand how it's not just age, or it's not just generation, and be careful, not to use generational stereotypes, because a lot of what has been attributed to generations, in fact, is much more of a life cycle phenomenon. So, for example, why is it that people who are in their late 30s, 40s, up to 50 feel the most stress? Well, because they are at a stage in life where they are most likely to have children, a big mortgage, and be trying to get ahead in their job. So all of that put together explains why they're at higher stress levels. Similarly, if you look at older workers, why is it that older workers are less concerned about job security? Well, because frankly, they've got the experience, and B, they're less worried about having to go out and find another job, because they're planning perhaps an exit from the workforce, or to look for another career. So I think that the generational discourse tends to overstate the differences. I think it's important, secondly, to know what the demographic composition of your workforce is. For example, we find that gender differences in many of these work values are greater than age group differences, which is an interesting phenomenon. And so just the more you can understand your workforce, the demographics, but also the things that people value and need, the better you will be able to address their talent management needs.
Fantastic. So we did have a couple of questions asking for information about the populations that you have surveyed to get your findings. So how and where do you complete your surveys, and do you have a specific area or province that you focus on?
Very good question, and I knew someone was going to ask this. If we go back to one of these slides here, let's see. This one here. Most of the data come from the 2015 survey. And you can see there's a little ECOS logo in the bottom left of each slide where there's data. So these are surveys that have been conducted by ECOS, a national polling firm. They are surveys that are representative of the workforce in Canada. Very large samples. You can see that the 2015 survey had over 6,800 people. They're weighted so that we weight them by region. And basically the margin of error and the confidence intervals for surveys of this size are very large. Like we're looking at 1.8% margin of error 95 times out of 100. The 2004 surveys, that would have been a representative sample of 2,000 or more. And again, I mean, the margin of error goes up a little bit, but basically that's it's still very, very good. So these are surveys that are part of ECOS's ongoing. They've got panels, and these panels, if people really are interested in the technical details, they're panels that are representative of the workforce, and so they're very large, and they're able to to put in questions on different topics and so on. So we know that there's good representation. And being able to track trends is important. So you have to have similarly representative samples of the workforce at different points in time to have some of the trend data. Like, for example, the chart on people saying that they're not confident that they could go out and find another job with their skills. So I hope that answers the question. There is a lot of detail on this in the book Redesigning Work, and if you're interested, I'd encourage you to look at that.
Well, thanks so much for answering those questions so thoroughly, Graham. We have reached the end of this webinar, and I just want to thank you again for taking the time out. It's been great to share this time with you. I'd also like to remind all of the attendees that this Graham's presentation will be available for you to get your hands on. So an email will be coming out to you in the next couple of days, letting you know how you can access that. So thanks again, Graham, and thanks to everyone for being with us today and for registering and listening to Graham's presentation.
And I'd like to thank everybody as well for participating today. I appreciate the questions. I appreciate your attention. And I also want to thank Joe and his team at HRD for setting up the webinar and for facilitating it. So thanks very much, Joe.
Thanks again.
Okay.
Bye.